The flames licked the night sky as Abigail Sutton's bookshop Her Life's Dream, and the heart of Santa Fe, New Mexico, turned into an inferno before her eyes. It was 1876, and the dry summer had turned the wooden structures of the bustling frontier town into perfect kindling for the disaster that now consumed everything she had worked for. Abigail coughed, the smoke burning her lungs as she stumbled through what remained of her beloved shop. The crackling of flames drowned out the shouts from outside, where a desperate bucket brigade attempted to contain the spreading fire. She had run back inside, foolishly perhaps, to salvage the lockbox containing her father's pocket watch and the deed to the property, the only things she had left of her parents. The heat was unbearable, sweat pouring down her face as she pushed deeper into the burning building. She had almost reached the back room when a thunderous crack split the air. Abigail looked up just as the ceiling beam gave way, crashing down upon her with devastating force. Pain exploded through her legs as she was pinned to the floor, the heavy timber crushing her against the wooden planks. "Help!" she screamed, her voice barely audible over the roar of the flames that were steadily approaching. The smoke was thickening, and each breath became more difficult than the last. Darkness began to edge her vision as she clawed helplessly at the floor, trying to pull herself free. Outside, Heath Lambert pulled his horse to a stop at the edge of the gathering crowd. The young rancher had just ridden into town with a herd of cattle when he spotted the orange glow lighting up the night sky. Now, dismounting quickly, he pushed his way through the throng of onlookers and volunteer firefighters. "Everyone accounted for," Heath shouted to Sheriff Donovan, who was organizing the bucket line. "The Sutton woman," the sheriff yelled back, his face grim in the firelight. "Someone said she ran back inside." Heath's eyes darted to the burning structure, where flames now consumed most of the front porch. Without hesitation, he yanked his bandana up over his nose and mouth and sprinted toward the building. "Lambert, don't be a fool." The sheriff called after him, but Heath was already kicking in what remained of the front door. The heat hit him like a wall, and he ducked low beneath the thickest smoke. "Hello," he shouted, squinting through the haze. "Is anyone in here?" A faint cry answered him from the back of the shop. Following the sound, Heath navigated around toppled bookshelves and burning debris. The floor creaked dangerously beneath his boots, threatening to give way at any moment. Then he saw her, a young woman with ash-streaked auburn hair, trapped beneath a massive ceiling beam. Her eyes, bright blue even through the smoke, locked onto his with desperate hope. "I can't move," she gasped, reaching toward him with soot-blackened fingers. Heath assessed the situation quickly. The beam was massive, at least 12 feet long and solid oak. In normal circumstances, it would take 3 men to lift it, but these weren't normal circumstances. "The roof's coming down," he warned, kneeling beside her. "I'm going to lift this beam, and when I do, you need to pull yourself out. Can you do that?" Abigail nodded weakly, summoning what little strength she had left. Heath positioned himself at the beam, bracing his legs and taking a deep breath. With a primal roar, he heaved upward, muscles straining and veins bulging in his neck. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the beam began to rise. "Now," he grunted through clenched teeth. Abigail dragged herself forward, biting back screams as pain shot through her injured legs. As soon as she was clear, Heath dropped the beam with a thunderous crash and scooped her into his arms in one fluid motion. "Hold on tight," he ordered, and she wrapped her arms around his neck as he turned toward the exit. But the way they had come was now completely engulfed in flames. Heath spun around, searching frantically for another way out. A window at the far end of the room offered their only chance. "Cover your face," he instructed, pulling her closer against his chest as he charged toward the window. Turning his shoulder at the last moment, he crashed through the glass and wooden frame, shielding Abigail with his body as they tumbled onto the dirt street behind the building. A cheer went up from the crowd as they emerged from the inferno. Heath carried Abigail away from the building just as the roof collapsed entirely, sending a shower of embers into the night sky. He didn't stop until they reached the doctor's office across the street, where he gently laid her on a bench outside. "You're safe now," he said, his voice hoarse from the smoke. In the light from the street lanterns, he got his first clear look at her face's delicate features, framed by auburn waves that had come loose from her updo and those striking blue eyes. "You saved my life," Abigail whispered, still clinging to his smoke-stained shirt. "I don't even know your name." "Heath Lambert," he replied, removing his hat and wiping sweat from his brow. "I ranch outside of town." "Abigail Sutton," she answered, wincing as she tried to move her legs. "The bookshop was mine." Their introduction was cut short as Dr. Fellows emerged from his office, summoned by the commotion. As the physician examined Abigail's injuries, Heath stepped back, suddenly aware of the crowd gathering around them. "You're a hero, Lambert," Sheriff Donovan declared, clapping him on the shoulder. "Never seen anything like it. That beam would have taken 4 men to lift." Heath shook his head, uncomfortable with the attention. "Anyone would have done the same." "But they didn't," Abigail said softly, her eyes finding his again over the doctor's shoulder. "You did." Something passed between them in that moment, something neither could name but both felt with startling clarity. As the doctor called for help to move Abigail inside, Heath found himself reluctant to leave her side. "Will you be all right?" he asked. "Thanks to you," she replied, managing a small smile despite her pain. Perhaps you could call on me once I'm recovered." "I'd like to thank you properly." Heath nodded, a smile tugging at his lips beneath his mustache. "I'd like that, Miss Sutton." As they carried her inside, Heath stood in the street, watching the last walls of the bookshop collapse into embers. He couldn't explain the protective feeling that had taken root in his chest, but he knew with certainty that this wouldn't be the last time he saw Abigail Sutton. The next morning, Abigail awoke in an unfamiliar bed, sunlight streaming through lace curtains. For a moment she was disoriented, until the pain in her legs and the memories of the previous night came flooding back. Her bookshop was gone, every book, every shelf, every dream she had poured into it over the last 3 years. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Fellows, the doctor's wife, entered with a tray of tea. "You're awake, dear. How are you feeling?" "Like I've been trampled by a herd of cattle," Abigail admitted, attempting to sit up. "But I'm alive, which is more than I expected last night." "Yes, that young Mr. Lambert performed quite the miracle," Mrs. Fellows said, setting the tray down and helping Abigail adjust her pillows. "Everyone's talking about it. Doctor says you're fortunate, nasty bruising and some minor burns, but no broken bones. Though you'll need to stay off your feet for at least a week." "A week?" Abigail's heart sank. "But I need to. To see what can be salvaged, to make arrangements. There will be time for that," Mrs. Fellows said firmly. "For now, you need to rest." She paused, a small smile playing at her lips. "Oh, and you have a visitor. He's been waiting since dawn." Abigail's heartbeat quickened. "Mr. Lambert, the very same. Shall I send him in?" After smoothing her hair and straightening her borrowed nightgown as best she could, Abigail nodded. A few moments later, Heath entered the room, hat in hand. He looked different in the daylight, younger than she had thought, perhaps 30 or so, with warm brown eyes and a strong jawline partially hidden beneath a neatly trimmed beard. His clothes were clean, though simple: a cotton shirt, sturdy trousers, and boots that had seen many miles. "Miss Sutton," he said, his voice deeper than she remembered. "How are you feeling?" Better, thank you, she replied, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must look. Please sit down. Heath took the chair beside her bed, his large frame making the small piece of furniture look almost comical. I wanted to check on you, and he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small metal box, blackened with soot but intact. I went back this morning to see if anything could be saved. Found this near where you were trapped. Abigail gasped, reaching for the box with trembling hands. My father's watch and the deed. Mr. Lambert, I can't begin to thank you. Heath, he corrected gently. And no thanks necessary, I'm just glad I found it. As Abigail opened the box to confirm its contents, Heath studied her more carefully in the daylight. She was beautiful, with a dusting of freckles across her nose and a determined set to her jaw that suggested she wasn't a woman who surrendered easily to misfortune. I also wanted to tell you, he continued, that I've spoken with some of the men in town. We're organizing a group to help clear the site and rebuild once you're ready. Abigail looked up in surprise. Rebuild? I don't know if that's possible. The insurance might not cover everything, and my savings, we'll figure it out, Heath said with quiet confidence. Santa Fe needs its bookshop, and from what I hear, you're not one to give up easily. You've heard about me? Abigail asked, curious. Heath smiled, a warm expression that transformed his rugged features. Small town. They say you came here from Boston 3 years ago, bought the old mercantile, and turned it into the finest bookshop in the territory. That you order books special for anyone who asks. Even if they can't read, you'll teach them yourself. Abigail felt her cheeks warm. I didn't realize I was the subject of such talk. All good things, Heath assured her, which is why folks are already asking how they can help. The Mendoza family is offering you a room in their boarding house until you're back on your feet. Martinez at the general store says he'll extend credit for whatever you need. Tears welled in Abigail's eyes. I've always loved this town, but I never expected such kindness. That's the way of things out here, Heath said. We take care of our own. Their conversation was interrupted by Dr. Fellows, who needed to change Abigail's bandages. Heath stood to leave, but paused at the door. If you don't mind, I'd like to call on you again tomorrow, he said. Perhaps bring you some of Mrs. Rodriguez's chicken soup, best medicine in the territory. Or so they say. I'd like that very much, Abigail replied, finding herself looking forward to seeing him again with an eagerness that surprised her. After Heath left, Dr. Fellows gave her a knowing look as he checked her injuries. Fine young man, that Lambert. One of the most respected ranchers in the area despite his age, built that spread of his from nothing after the war. He fought in the war? Abigail asked. Cavalry, I believe. Doesn't talk about it much. The doctor finished rewrapping her leg. But he's honest and hardworking, and single, which has half the unmarried women in 3 counties setting their caps for him. I wasn't, Abigail began, but the doctor chuckled. Of course not. Just making conversation. Later that day, with Mrs. Fellows' help, Abigail was moved to the Mendoza boarding house, where she was given a comfortable room on the first floor to accommodate her limited mobility. Maria Mendoza, a warm woman in her 50s, fussed over her like a mother hen, bringing extra pillows and promising to have her daughter Sophia help with any personal needs. That evening, as Abigail sat by the window watching the sunset paint the adobe buildings of Santa Fe in shades of gold and pink, she contemplated her situation. The loss of her shop was devastating, but the kindness of the townspeople and the unexpected appearance of Heath Lambert in her life gave her hope that perhaps all was not lost. She took out her father's pocket watch from the lockbox, running her thumb over its engraved surface. "What would you think of all this, Papa?" she whispered. The watch had stopped at 9:17, presumably when the fire had reached it. A new beginning, perhaps. The next morning, true to his word, Heath arrived with a covered pot of Mrs. Rodriguez's famous chicken soup. He wasn't alone. His ranch hand, a young man named Caleb, accompanied him, arms laden with books. "Miss Sutton," Heath greeted her, as Sophia showed them into the small parlor where Abigail was resting on a chaise lounge. "I hope you're feeling better today." "Much better, thank you," she replied, sitting up straighter and self-consciously touching her hair, which she had managed to pin up with Sophia's help. "These are from my personal library," Heath explained as Caleb carefully set the stack of books on the table beside her. "Not much compared to what you lost, but I thought you might want something to read while you recover." Abigail examined the titles with growing wonder: volumes of Dickens and Twain, several poetry collections, and even a well-worn copy of Pride and Prejudice. "You've read Austen?" she asked, unable to hide her surprise. Heath smiled, a hint of color touching his tanned cheeks. "My mother was an educated woman. She believed a man should be as comfortable with books as he is with horses." He cleared his throat. "Though I admit, I preferred Cooper's Leatherstocking Tales when I was younger." Abigail laughed, delighted by this unexpected side of the rugged rancher. "A man of hidden depths, Mr. Lambert." "Heath," he reminded her gently, "and hardly hidden. Just not much call for literary discussion when you're mending fences or breaking horses." Their conversation flowed easily after that, discovering shared favorites and debating the merits of various authors. Caleb excused himself after delivering the soup, giving his boss a knowing grin that Heath pointedly ignored. As they talked, Abigail learned more about Heath's ranch, the Flying L, which he had built from a small parcel of land into one of the most productive cattle operations in the territory. He spoke with pride but without boasting, and his obvious love for the land and his animals revealed a man of deep passion and commitment. In turn, Heath listened intently as Abigail shared stories of her childhood in Boston, her father's shipping business, and her decision to move west after her parents died in a carriage accident, leaving her alone at 22. "Most women would have found a husband or moved in with relatives," Heath observed. "What made you choose to start fresh in Santa Fe, of all places?" Abigail smiled, remembering. "My father had a business associate who mentioned the growing town needed a bookshop. I'd worked in a bookstore in Boston and loved it. The idea of building something of my own, somewhere people didn't have preconceived notions about who I was supposed to be, it was irresistible." "Brave," Heath said simply. "Not everyone understands that kind of calling. Did you have a calling to ranch, I mean?" Heath looked out the window, his expression thoughtful. "After the war, I couldn't stand being closed in. Needed open spaces, room to breathe. Worked my way west as a drover, saved every penny. When I saw this land," he shook his head, searching for words, "it was like it had been waiting for me." Their eyes met, and Abigail felt a flutter in her chest at the intensity of his gaze. There was something comforting yet exhilarating about Heath's presence, as if she had found something she hadn't realized she was missing. The moment was broken by Sophia, who came to announce that lunch was ready. Heath rose to leave, explaining that he needed to return to the ranch, but promised to visit again soon. "The men and I will start clearing the site of your shop tomorrow," he told her. "Sheriff Donovan thinks the fire started in the Chandler's shop next door. No one's fault, just bad luck." "Thank you," Abigail said, touched by his continued kindness. "But please don't feel obligated. It's not obligation," Heath interrupted gently. I'd like to help if you'll let me." Abigail nodded, unable to find words for the gratitude and something more that swelled within her. As he left, she found herself already looking forward to his next visit. Over the next week, Heath became a regular visitor at the boarding house. Each day he would bring news of the cleanup efforts at the bookshop site, sometimes accompanied by small gifts, wildflowers from the prairie, a jar of honey from his hives, or once, a beautiful quartz crystal he had found while clearing debris. Abigail's recovery progressed steadily. By the end of the week, she was able to walk short distances with the aid of a cane Dr. Fellows had provided. Her first outing was to visit the remains of her bookshop, where she found Heath and a dozen other men working to salvage what they could and clear away the charred debris. The sight of the blackened timbers and ash-covered ground brought tears to her eyes, but they were quickly replaced by amazement at the community effort unfolding before her. Women from the church auxiliary had set up tables with food and drink for the workers. Children ran errands, carrying messages and tools. Even old Judge Harmon, who rarely left his office at the courthouse, was there with his sleeves rolled up, sorting through recovered items. "Miss Sutton," Heath called when he spotted her, hurrying over with concern etched on his face. "You shouldn't be out here in this dust with your lungs still healing." "I had to see," she explained, leaning more heavily on her cane than she wanted to admit. "I had to thank everyone." Heath's expression softened. "Then let me show you what we've found." He guided her to a wagon where salvaged items had been carefully arranged, a few metal fittings, her partly charred desk, and miraculously, a small crate of books that had been protected by falling into a stone-lined basement area. "The foundation is still solid," Heath explained, pointing out the stone perimeter. "And we've already had offers of lumber from Jensen's mill at a reduced price. Martinez is donating the nails and hardware." Abigail was overwhelmed. "I don't know what to say." "This is more than I could have hoped for." "Say you'll rebuild," Heath replied, his voice low and earnest. "This town needs its bookshop and its bookseller." Their eyes met, and Abigail felt that now familiar flutter in her chest. "Yes," she whispered, "I'll rebuild." A cheer went up from the workers who had gathered around them, and Abigail found herself surrounded by well-wishers and offers of help. Throughout it all, Heath remained at her side, his steady presence a comfort in the whirlwind of activity. As the weeks passed, Abigail's strength returned, and the rebuilding of her shop progressed rapidly. The structure that rose from the ashes was larger and sturdier than the original, with wide windows to let in natural light and custom shelving built by the town's carpenter. Heath continued to visit daily, often joining the construction effort after finishing his ranch work. Abigail noticed that he seemed to time his arrival to coincide with the end of the workday, when they could talk privately as the other volunteers departed. Their conversations ranged widely from books and ideas to their hopes and dreams. Heath spoke of his plans to expand his cattle operation and experiment with new breeding stock. Abigail shared her vision for the new shop, which would include a reading room for children and a lending library for those who couldn't afford to buy books. One evening, as they sat on the newly built porch of the bookshop watching the sunset, Heath surprised her by asking about her intentions to stay in Santa Fe. "Before the fire," he began hesitantly, "were you planning to remain here permanently? Or was the bookshop just a temporary venture?" Abigail considered the question. "When I first arrived, I wasn't sure how long I would stay, but now—" She gestured toward the town square where children played and neighbors greeted each other in the cooling evening air. "This has become home. These people are family." Relief washed over Heath's features. "I'm glad to hear that." "Why do you ask?" Abigail inquired, curious about his interest. Heath looked down at his hands, unusually uncertain. "I've grown accustomed to seeing you every day," he admitted. The thought of that ending was uncomfortable. The simple honesty of his words touched Abigail deeply. "I've grown accustomed to it too," she said softly. Their eyes met, and for a moment, Abigail thought Heath might reach for her hand or perhaps say more. But the moment was interrupted by Sheriff Donovan calling out a greeting as he passed by on his evening rounds. The opportunity lost. Heath stood and offered to walk Abigail back to the boarding house, as had become their custom. As they strolled through the twilight streets, their hands occasionally brushed, sending tingles up Abigail's arm. Neither acknowledged the contact, but neither moved away either. 2 months after the fire, the new bookshop was finally ready to open. Crates of books had arrived from publishers in Chicago and New York, ordered with funds raised by the town's citizens and supplemented by Abigail's insurance payment. The night before the grand reopening, Heath surprised Abigail by arriving at the shop with a special delivery. "I have something for you," he said, guiding her to the front of the store where a cloth-covered object stood. "What is this?" Abigail asked, intrigued. "A shop needs a sign," Heath replied, pulling away the cloth to reveal a beautifully carved wooden sign reading Sutton's Books and Lending Library in elegant lettering. "Oh, Heath," Abigail gasped, running her fingers over the smooth, polished wood. "Did you make this?" He nodded, a rare shyness coming over him. "Been working on it in the evenings. Wanted you to have something special for tomorrow." Impulsively, Abigail stood on tiptoe and kissed his cheek. "It's beautiful, thank you." Heath's eyes darkened at the contact, and he reached up to gently touch her face. "Abigail," he began, his voice husky. The door chime interrupted them as Sophia Mendoza burst in, excited about the opening preparations. The moment broken once again, Heath stepped back, though his eyes lingered on Abigail's face. "I should go," he said reluctantly. "Early start tomorrow with the cattle." "Will you come to the opening?" Abigail asked. "Wouldn't miss it for the world." The reopening was a tremendous success. It seemed everyone in Santa Fe and the surrounding areas had turned out to celebrate the rebirth of Sutton's books. Children crowded the new reading corner, where Abigail had set up comfortable cushions and low shelves filled with colorful volumes. Adults browsed the expanded selection of novels, reference books, and periodicals. Heath arrived mid-morning, freshly shaved and wearing his best shirt. He hung back at first, watching with evident pride as Abigail moved among her customers, recommending titles and recording lending cards for those who couldn't afford to purchase. When the initial rush subsided, he approached her with a small package wrapped in brown paper. "A little opening day gift," he explained, handing it to her. "Though it's really the other way around, your shop is a gift to the entire community." Abigail unwrapped the package to find a leather-bound journal, its cover tooled with intricate designs of books and flowers. Inside, the first page bore an inscription in Heath's surprisingly elegant handwriting, "For new beginnings. With admiration, H.L." "It's exquisite," she said, deeply touched. "Thank you, Heath." He shifted slightly, seeming nervous. "I was wondering if you might join me for dinner tonight. To celebrate your success. There's a new restaurant at the hotel. They say the cook trained in New Orleans." "I'd be delighted," Abigail replied, her heart skipping at the formal invitation. That evening, Abigail took special care with her appearance, wearing her best dress, a deep blue that matched her eyes, and arranging her auburn hair in a sophisticated updo. When Heath arrived to escort her, his appreciative gaze made her efforts worthwhile. The restaurant was the most elegant establishment in Santa Fe, with white tablecloths and a small trio of musicians playing in the corner. As they were seated at a table near the window, Abigail noticed several curious glances from other diners. "I believe we're the subject of some interest," she murmured, amused. Heath smiled ruefully. "Small towns. Everyone knows everyone's business or thinks they should." He leaned forward slightly. "Does it bother you, the attention?" Abigail considered. "No. I suppose I've given them plenty to talk about already, the independent Boston woman with her bookshop, then the fire, and now dining with the territory's most eligible bachelor. Heath chuckled at her description. Is that what they call me, among other things? Abigail teased. Mrs. Fellows was quite informative about your standing in the community. All good things, I hope. Very good things, she assured him. Though she did mention there would be broken hearts across 3 counties when word gets out that you've been calling on me so regularly. Heath's expression grew serious. Would that bother you if people thought we were courting? Abigail felt her cheeks warm, but she held his gaze. No, she said honestly. It wouldn't bother me at all. The smile that spread across Heath's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He reached across the table and took her hand in his. Good, he said simply. Because I've been trying to find the courage to ask if I might court you properly, Miss Sutton. I believe you just did, Mr. Lambert, she replied, her heart soaring, and my answer is yes. Their dinner was the first of many outings that followed over the next several months. Heath took Abigail riding in the foothills, showing her his favorite vistas of the New Mexico landscape. They attended the Harvest Festival together, where Heath won her a silk handkerchief at the ring toss. On Sundays, they sat together in church, their growing attachment clear to everyone in town. Through it all, Abigail's bookshop thrived. She expanded her lending library program and, with Heath's help, began a monthly wagon service to bring books to outlying ranches and farms. Heath, for his part, found himself spending more and more time in town, adjusting his ranch schedule to allow for regular visits to Sutton's books. As winter approached, bringing cool nights and occasional dustings of snow to the high desert, Heath invited Abigail to visit his ranch for the first time. The Flying L was located 15 miles outside of town, nestled in a fertile valley with a small stream running through it. As they rode up to the main house in Heath's wagon, Abigail was struck by the beauty and order of the place. The house itself was modest but well built, with a wide porch and sturdy stone chimney. Behind it stood a large barn, corrals, and several smaller outbuildings. Cattle grazed on the surrounding pastures, fat and healthy. It's wonderful, Heath, she said sincerely. You've built something remarkable here. Pride shone in his eyes as he helped her down from the wagon. It's taken 10 years of hard work, but it's finally becoming what I envisioned. Heath gave her a tour of the property, introducing her to his small staff Caleb, whom she had met before, and the cook, Mrs. Holbrook, a widow who had come west with her grown son who also worked at the ranch. The house was comfortably furnished with solid, handcrafted pieces, many made by Heath himself. In the study, Abigail discovered Heath's personal library, far more extensive than she had imagined. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 2 walls, filled with volumes on ranching, history, and literature. You didn't tell me you were such an avid reader, she said, running her fingers along the spines. Heath smiled. Some things a man likes to keep to himself, at least until he meets someone who shares the passion. After the tour, Mrs. Holbrook served them a hearty lunch of beef stew and fresh bread. As they ate, Heath spoke of his plans for the spring calving season and his hopes to add another section of land to his holdings. It would give me access to the higher pastures for summer grazing, he explained. And there's a small apple orchard on the property that's been neglected but could be restored. You have a beautiful vision for this place, Abigail observed. Heath looked at her intently. More than that, he said quietly. I have a vision for a life here, a full life. The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but clear. As they finished their meal and prepared to return to town before darkness fell, Heath took her hands in his. I wanted you to see this place, he said, his voice earnest. to understand what I'm offering when I say that I care deeply for you, Abigail. I care for you too, Heath, she replied, her heart pounding. More than I thought possible in such a short time. He nodded, seemingly relieved by her admission but not yet ready to say more. Give me time, he requested. There are things I want to prepare to make right before I understand, Abigail assured him, though part of her longed to hear the words she sensed he was holding back. The ride back to town was quiet but comfortable, both lost in thoughts of what the future might hold. When they reached the boarding house, Heath helped her down from the wagon and held her hands a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you for coming today," he said softly. "It meant a great deal to me." "Thank you for showing me your home," Abigail replied, equally sincere. "It's a special place." Their farewell was interrupted by the arrival of the stagecoach, bringing with it a flurry of activity as passengers disembarked and luggage was unloaded. Among the new arrivals was a tall, distinguished-looking man in an expensive Eastern suit who glanced in their direction with curious interest. Abigail thought nothing of it until the next morning, when the same man entered her bookshop just after opening. He browsed the shelves briefly before approaching the counter where she was arranging a display of new titles. "Miss Sutton," he inquired, removing his hat. "I'm James Blackburn, representing Western Union Telegraph Company. How may I help you, Mr. Blackburn?" Abigail asked, setting aside her work. "I've been sent to evaluate Santa Fe for the establishment of a telegraph office," he explained. "Your establishment was recommended as a potential location, given its central position in town." Surprise and excitement flooded through Abigail. "A telegraph office. Here in my shop. We would lease a corner space," Blackburn elaborated. "The arrangement has worked well in other towns of similar size. The telegraph brings customers, and a bookshop provides a respectable, literate atmosphere for the operation." "It's an intriguing proposal," Abigail admitted, her mind already calculating the potential benefits: increased foot traffic, additional income from the lease, and the prestige of hosting such an important service. "Excellent," Blackburn said, clearly pleased. "I'll be in town for the week, conducting surveys and meeting with town officials. Perhaps we could discuss the details over dinner tomorrow evening." Before Abigail could respond, the shop door opened and Heath entered, carrying a package. He stopped short at the sight of Blackburn, his expression immediately guarded. "Lambert," Blackburn acknowledged with a nod. "I thought that was you yesterday. It's been some time." "Blackburn," Heath replied coolly. "What brings you to Santa Fe?" "Business," the man replied simply, before turning back to Abigail. "About dinner, Miss Sutton," Abigail glanced between the two men, sensing the tension. "I appreciate the invitation, Mr. Blackburn, but perhaps a business lunch would be more appropriate. Say tomorrow at 1 o'clock. Blackburn smiled, though his eyes remained on Heath. "Of course. Until tomorrow, then." After he left, Abigail turned to Heath. "You know Mr. Blackburn?" Heath's jaw tightened. "From the war. We served in the same unit for a time." He set the package on the counter. "I brought you those seed catalogs you were asking about." "Thank you," Abigail said, concerned by his sudden terseness. "Heath, is everything all right? You seem troubled by Mr. Blackburn's presence." Heath sighed, his shoulders relaxing slightly. "It's complicated. We had disagreements during the war, nothing that concerns the present." Abigail wasn't entirely convinced but chose not to press. "He wants to put a telegraph office in my shop." "So I gathered," Heath replied, his expression unreadable. "Would that interest you?" "I'm considering it," she admitted. "It would bring more customers and the extra income wouldn't hurt." Heath nodded slowly. "It's a good opportunity. Just be cautious with Blackburn. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully, very focused on getting what he wants. With that cryptic warning, Heath excused himself, explaining that he needed to meet with the blacksmith about some repairs. Abigail watched him go, puzzled by the encounter and the obvious history between the two men. The next day, her lunch meeting with Blackburn went smoothly. The terms he offered were generous, and the proposed changes to her shop minimal. By the end of the meal, Abigail was inclined to accept the arrangement, pending review of the formal contract. As they were finishing their coffee, Blackburn steered the conversation in an unexpected direction. "You and Lambert seem well acquainted," he remarked casually. "We are good friends," Abigail replied, maintaining her professional demeanor despite the personal nature of the question. "Interesting," Blackburn mused. "He's changed since I knew him. More settled." "People often change after war," Abigail observed. Blackburn studied her for a moment. "Did he tell you how he earned his commendation? The one that made him Lieutenant Lambert before he was 22? "No," Abigail admitted, her curiosity piqued despite herself. "Heath rarely spoke of his war experiences. Our unit was ambushed," Blackburn recounted, his voice taking on a storyteller's cadence. "The captain was killed immediately. Lambert took command, organized a defense that held until reinforcements arrived. Single-handedly carried 3 wounded men to safety under heavy fire." Abigail was surprised, but somehow not shocked. The strength and courage Heath had shown in rescuing her from the fire suddenly seemed part of a pattern. "That sounds like the man I know," she said softly. "Indeed," Blackburn agreed. "Always the hero." There was something in his tone, not quite mockery, but something less than admiration, that bothered Abigail. She steered the conversation back to business, and they parted with an agreement to meet again in 2 days to finalize the arrangement. As Abigail returned to her shop, she found herself troubled by the encounter, though she couldn't quite identify why. That evening, Heath visited as usual, bringing a small pot of Mrs. Holbrook's preserves. Abigail told him about her meeting with Blackburn and the likely telegraph agreement. "If it's what you want, I'm happy for you," Heath said, though she detected a note of reservation in his voice. "But," she prompted gently. Heath hesitated. "Just make sure the contract protects your interests. Blackburn is ambitious, always has been. The telegraph is expanding rapidly, and he's climbing the company ladder even faster." "He told me about your commendation," Abigail said, watching Heath's reaction carefully. "About the ambush." Heath's expression closed off immediately. "Did he now?" "And what else did he share about our time in the cavalry?" "Nothing specific," Abigail replied, surprised by his reaction. "Heath, what happened between you two?" For a long moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he sighed, moving to the window of her small apartment above the shop where they were sitting. "We were friends once," he began, looking out at the darkening street. "Joined up together in '61, full of patriotic fervor. But war changes people, shows you who they really are beneath the surface." He turned back to face her. "After that ambush, things were different. I was promoted, he wasn't. There was an incident later, a civilian family accused of helping the enemy. I wanted to investigate. Blackburn wanted to make an example." His voice grew hard. "He didn't wait for orders." The implications hung heavy in the air. Abigail felt a chill despite the warm fire in the grate. "What happened?" "I stopped him," Heath said simply. "But not before." He shook his head, the memory clearly painful. "I reported him. He was disciplined but not discharged. His father had connections. After that, we were transferred to different units. I haven't seen him since the war ended." "And now he's here," Abigail murmured, "offering me a business opportunity." Heath crossed the room to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "I don't want to influence your decision. The telegraph would be good for your shop and for Santa Fe. Just be careful. Don't sign anything without having Judge Harmon review it first." Abigail nodded, touched by his concern. "I will, I promise." True to her word, Abigail had Judge Harmon review the contract before her final meeting with Blackburn. The judge suggested several modifications to protect her interests, which Blackburn accepted with only minor objections. By the end of the week, the agreement was signed, and plans were underway to install the telegraph equipment in a corner of the bookshop. Throughout the process, Heath maintained a polite distance from the business arrangements, though he made his continued support for Abigail clear. Their courtship proceeded, with Heath joining Abigail for Sunday dinners at the Mendoza boarding house and escorting her to various town functions. As Christmas approached, excitement grew in Santa Fe. The plaza was decorated with pine boughs and paper lanterns, and preparations were underway for the traditional Las Posadas procession that would take place over 9 nights before Christmas. Abigail threw herself into the holiday spirit, decorating her shop with greenery, and organizing a special story time for children featuring Christmas tales from around the world. Heath helped her hang a beautiful wreath on the shop door and surprised her with a small Christmas tree for her apartment, which they decorated together one snowy evening. As they placed the final ornament, a delicate glass star that Heath had brought back from his last cattle drive to Colorado, he caught her hand in his. "Abigail," he began, his voice unusually solemn, "there's something I've been wanting to ask you." Her heart quickened at his tone. "Yes." "Christmas is a time for family," he continued, his eyes never leaving hers. "And I've been thinking a great deal about family lately, about creating one of my own." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Abigail's breath caught as he opened it to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond. "It was my mother's," Heath explained, his voice husky with emotion. "She made me promise to give it only to a woman of intelligence and character, someone who would be a true partner in life." He took a deep breath. "I love you, Abigail Sutton. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears of joy sprang to Abigail's eyes. "Yes," she whispered. Then more firmly, "Yes, Heath. I love you too, and nothing would make me happier." Heath slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms, his lips finding hers in a tender, reverent kiss that spoke of promises and shared dreams. When they finally parted, both were smiling through tears. "Mrs. Holbrook will be pleased," Heath said with a chuckle. "She's been asking when I was going to make an honest woman out of you for months now." Abigail laughed, her heart overflowing with happiness. "And Caleb?" "Already planning to decorate the bunkhouse for the wedding celebration," Heath confirmed. "Though I think he's more excited about the prospect of your apple pies becoming a regular fixture at the ranch." They spent the evening planning their future together, a spring wedding, after the calving season but before the summer heat. Abigail would maintain her bookshop, traveling to the ranch on weekends until they decided on a more permanent arrangement. "I want you to be happy," Heath insisted. "Your shop is important to you and to Santa Fe. We'll make it work." As the first flakes of a gentle snowfall began to drift past the windows, Abigail and Heath stood wrapped in each other's arms, watching the transformation of the street below into a winter wonderland. "This time last year, I never could have imagined how much my life would change," Abigail mused. "The fire seemed like such a tragedy at the time." "And now?" Heath asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Now I see it was the beginning of something beautiful," she replied, turning in his arms to meet his gaze. "It brought you to me." The news of their engagement spread quickly through Santa Fe, met with universal approval and congratulations. Even Blackburn, who had established temporary offices in the hotel while overseeing the telegraph installation, offered his good wishes. though Heath received them with polite reserve. The installation of the telegraph proceeded smoothly, and by mid-January, Santa Fe was connected to the wider world through the clicking machine in the corner of Sutton's books. The arrangement proved as beneficial as Blackburn had promised, bringing new customers and additional income. With their wedding set for April, Heath and Abigail began making preparations in earnest. Mrs. Holbrook and Sophia Mendoza collaborated on designing Abigail's wedding dress, while Heath set his ranch hands to work expanding the main house to better accommodate a family. "I'm adding a proper library," he told Abigail during one of her weekend visits to the ranch, "with built-in shelves and a window seat where you can read and watch the sunset over the mountains." Abigail was touched by his thoughtfulness. "It sounds perfect." The transition from winter to spring brought warmer days and the beginning of calving season at the Flying L. Heath was busier than ever, often working from dawn until well after dark to ensure the health of his expanding herd. Despite his exhaustion, he still made time to visit Abigail several times a week, sometimes arriving with hay in his hair and the scent of the stables clinging to his clothes. "You should be resting, not riding all the way to town," Abigail scolded gently one evening when he arrived looking particularly weary. "I rest better after seeing you," he replied simply, drawing her into his arms. As their wedding day approached, a new issue arose that threatened to dampen the celebration. Blackburn announced that Western Union was considering establishing a regional office in Santa Fe, which would require significantly more space than the corner of Abigail's shop could provide. "We'd need to expand," he explained during a meeting at the bookshop. "Possibly take over the entire ground floor, with you relocating your business to another site. Of course, we would compensate you generously." "That wasn't part of our agreement," Abigail objected, distressed at the thought of surrendering her carefully rebuilt shop. "The contract clearly states that the telegraph operation is limited to the designated area." Blackburn's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Contracts can be renegotiated, Miss Sutton. Think of the economic benefit to Santa Fe, the jobs it would create." "I'll need time to consider this," Abigail replied, unwilling to be pressured into a decision. "Of course," Blackburn agreed smoothly, "but don't wait too long. Other towns are eager for this opportunity." When Heath learned of Blackburn's proposal, his reaction was immediate and forceful. "He's trying to leverage your sense of civic duty," he said, pacing Abigail's apartment, "using the town's interests against your own. But what if he's right?" Abigail questioned, troubled. "What if refusing means Santa Fe loses this opportunity?" "Then that's Blackburn's choice, not yours," Heath insisted. He signed a contract knowing the limitations of the space. If Western Union truly wants a regional office here, they can find another location. The situation became more complicated when Blackburn took his proposal to the town council, presenting the regional office as a major economic opportunity for Santa Fe. Several influential citizens, including Mayor Thompson, began pressuring Abigail to accept the expanded arrangement. "It would bring prosperity to the whole town," the mayor argued during a visit to her shop. "Surely you can see the greater good here." Torn between her own interests and those of the community she had grown to love, Abigail sought advice from Judge Harmon. The elderly jurist reviewed the original contract carefully before giving his opinion. "Legally, you're on solid ground refusing his proposal," the judge told her. "But Blackburn is a determined man with powerful connections. This could become unpleasant." "What would you do?" Abigail asked. The judge considered for a moment. "I'd suggest a compromise. Perhaps offer to sell the building to Western Union at a fair price enough to allow you to purchase another suitable location for your shop. That way, the Telegraph gets its office, you keep your business, and Santa Fe benefits from both. Armed with this approach, Abigail arranged to meet with Blackburn at the hotel restaurant. To her surprise, he readily agreed to her counter-proposal, offering a generous sum for the building. "I always knew you were a practical woman," he said, raising his glass in a toast. "This arrangement will benefit everyone." As they were concluding their meeting, Heath entered the restaurant, having just finished business with the bank across the street. His expression darkened at the sight of Abigail and Blackburn sharing a meal, but he approached their table with measured calm. "Lambert," Blackburn greeted him with a hint of smugness. "Join us. We're celebrating a successful negotiation." "Is that so?" Heath replied, looking to Abigail for clarification. "I've agreed to sell the building," she explained, "at a price that will allow me to establish the shop elsewhere. Mr. Blackburn has been most accommodating." Heath's gaze moved between them, assessing. "I'm glad to hear it," he said finally, though his tone suggested otherwise. "When will this transaction take place?" "After your wedding, of course," Blackburn assured them. "I wouldn't dream of disrupting such a happy occasion." Despite the seemingly amicable resolution, tension lingered between Heath and Abigail as he escorted her back to her shop. Once inside, with the door closed against curious eyes, he finally spoke his mind. "I don't trust him," Heath stated bluntly. "This agreement came too easily." "Perhaps he simply recognized a fair offer," Abigail suggested, though she understood Heath's concerns. "Judge Harmon will review all the paperwork before I sign anything final." Heath nodded, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "I just want to protect you." "I know," Abigail said softly, stepping into his embrace. "But sometimes you have to let me fight my own battles." He held her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "It's not easy," he admitted, "especially when it involves Blackburn. The important thing is that we've found a solution that works for everyone," Abigail reminded him. "Now we can focus on our wedding." The weeks leading up to the wedding flew by in a whirlwind of preparations. Abigail divided her time between running the shop, searching for a suitable new location, and finalizing wedding details. Heath completed the additions to the ranch house and prepared a special surprise for his bride, a secluded garden area behind the house, complete with a small gazebo where she could read or simply enjoy the mountain views. 3 days before the wedding, as Abigail was closing the shop for the evening, Blackburn arrived with the final purchase agreement. "All standard terms," he assured her, "just as we discussed." True to her word, Abigail insisted on having Judge Harmon review the document before signing. "I can bring it to you tomorrow," she promised. Blackburn's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "I'd prefer to conclude this tonight. The telegraph office in Denver is awaiting confirmation." "I'm sorry, but I gave my word to Heath," Abigail replied firmly. "The judge first, then signatures." Something flashed in Blackburn's eyes, anger, perhaps, or frustration before his polite mask returned. "Of course. First thing tomorrow, then." After he left, Abigail locked up and prepared to take the document to Judge Harmon's home. As she climbed the stairs to her apartment to retrieve her shawl, she noticed a strange smell, something acrid and chemical. Following the odor, she discovered a small pool of liquid seeping under the door of the storage closet where old newspapers were kept. When she opened the door, the smell intensified, and she spotted a rag soaked in what she recognized as lamp oil, positioned dangerously near a box of matches. Heart pounding, Abigail backed away and ran downstairs to find Sheriff Donovan. The lawman arrived quickly, examining the evidence with a grim expression. "Someone was setting up for a fire," he confirmed, carefully removing the oil-soaked materials. "Likely planning to return after you'd gone to bed." "But who would?" Abigail began, then fell silent as the implication dawned on her. The timing, so close to her agreement with Blackburn, couldn't be coincidental. Sheriff Donovan seemed to read her thoughts. "I'll need to speak with Mr. Blackburn," he said evenly. "And I think you should stay elsewhere tonight, just to be safe." Abigail spent the night at the Mendoza boarding house, unable to sleep as her mind raced with suspicions and fears. Early the next morning, Heath arrived, having been summoned by the sheriff. His face was taut with anger as Abigail recounted what had happened. "This ends now," he declared, his voice cold with determination. "I'm going to find Blackburn." "Heath, wait," Abigail pleaded, catching his arm. "Let the sheriff handle this. We don't know for certain it was him." "I know," Heath replied grimly. "I've seen this pattern before." Before she could stop him, Heath strode out of the boarding house, heading toward the hotel where Blackburn was staying. Abigail hurried after him, fear gripping her heart. She reached the hotel just as Heath confronted Blackburn in the lobby. A small crowd had already gathered, drawn by the tension between the two men. "You went too far this time," Heath was saying, his voice controlled but vibrating with anger. "Setting up a fire to destroy her shop when she wouldn't immediately agree to your terms. That's a new low, even for you." Blackburn's face remained impassive. "I have no idea what you're talking about, Lambert. Perhaps you should consider that your fiancée might have arranged this herself. Insurance fraud is not uncommon among struggling business owners." The accusation was so outrageous that a collective gasp rose from the onlookers. Heath's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Take it back," he demanded, stepping closer to Blackburn. "Now, or what?" Blackburn taunted. "You'll attack an unarmed man. That would certainly confirm what I've been telling people about your violent tendencies." Abigail pushed through the crowd to reach Heath's side. "It's not worth it," she urged quietly, placing a restraining hand on his arm. "This is what he wants." The arrival of Sheriff Donovan prevented further escalation. "Mr. Blackburn," the lawman said formally, "I need you to come with me to answer some questions." "On what grounds?" Blackburn demanded. "We found evidence linking you to the attempted arson at Miss Sutton's shop," the sheriff replied. "A witness saw you near the back entrance last night after closing." Color drained from Blackburn's face. "That's absurd. I was at the hotel all evening." "The hotel staff say otherwise," Donovan countered. "Now, are you coming willingly, or do I need to make this official?" Realizing he was cornered, Blackburn's composure finally cracked. "This is your doing," he hissed at Heath. "You've turned them all against me, just like in the war." "You did that yourself," Heath replied evenly. "Both times." As Sheriff Donovan led Blackburn away, the tension in the lobby gradually dissipated. Heath turned to Abigail, his eyes searching her face. "Are you all right?" "I am now," she assured him, though she was shaken by the confrontation. "I can't believe he would go to such lengths over a business deal." "It wasn't about the business," Heath said quietly. "It was about finishing what started between us during the war." Understanding dawned on Abigail. "He came to Santa Fe because of you." "The telegraph office was just an excuse," Heath nodded grimly. "I suspected as much when he first arrived, but I didn't want to believe anyone could harbor a grudge for so long." Later that day, after providing formal statements to the sheriff, Heath and Abigail sought refuge at the ranch, away from the gossip and speculation that had gripped the town. As they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple, Abigail finally asked the question that had been troubling her. "What really happened between you and Blackburn during the war? There's more to it than you told me, isn't there?" Heath was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with the weight of memory. The civilian family I mentioned, they were farmers, just trying to survive in a war-torn landscape. Blackburn was convinced they were hiding Confederate soldiers, but there was no evidence. He wanted to make an example of them. Heath's jaw tightened. I arrived just as he was about to execute the father in front of his wife and children. Abigail gasped softly, imagining the scene. "What did you do?" I stopped him, Heath said simply. "Physically. We fought, and in the struggle his gun went off, wounding him in the shoulder. After that, I reported the incident to our commanding officer." He turned to face her, his eyes haunted. "He never forgave me for stopping him, for the injury, for the discipline that followed. He believed it cost him advancement in the army. And he's carried that hatred all these years," Abigail murmured, understanding at last the depth of Blackburn's animosity. "Some men can't let go of the past," Heath replied. "They let it poison their future." Abigail reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers. "You saved that family," she said softly. "Just as you saved me from the fire. You're a good man, Heath Lambert." He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm. "I try to be, and having you in my life makes me want to be better still." The next day brought news that Blackburn had been charged with attempted arson and fraud. Western Union had disavowed any knowledge of his actions and sent a representative to apologize to Abigail and the town council. The telegraph office would remain in its original location in the bookshop, with no expansion planned. With the threat removed and justice being served, Abigail and Heath were able to refocus on their upcoming wedding. The incident had shaken them, but also strengthened their bond, reinforcing their commitment to building a life together based on honesty and mutual support. The wedding day dawned clear and mild, perfect weather for the outdoor ceremony planned at the Flying L Ranch. Heath had insisted on holding the celebration at his home, their future home, with the newly completed garden as the backdrop. Abigail prepared in the main house, assisted by Sophia Mendoza and Mrs. Holbrook. Her dress was a creation of ivory satin with delicate lace overlay, simple yet elegant. Her auburn hair was adorned with small white flowers, and around her neck hung a pearl pendant that had been Heath's mother's, his wedding gift to her. As she stood before the mirror, making final adjustments to her veil, a knock sounded at the door. Judge Harmon entered, resplendent in his Sunday best. "You look beautiful, my dear," he said, his eyes misty. "Your parents would be so proud." "Thank you," Abigail replied, touched by his words. The elderly judge had become something of a father figure to her over the past 3 years. "I'm honored that you asked me to give you away," he continued. "It's been a privilege to watch you build your life here in Santa Fe. I can't imagine anyone I'd rather have by my side today," Abigail assured him. When it was time, Judge Harmon offered his arm, and together they made their way to the garden where guests had gathered. The path was lined with lanterns that would illuminate their way back after the ceremony, as dusk would be falling. As they rounded the corner of the house, Abigail's breath caught at the sight before her. The garden was transformed, with wildflowers and ribbons decorating every surface. Lanterns hung from tree branches, casting a warm glow over the assembled guests. And there, waiting beneath an arch of roses, stood Heath, more handsome than she had ever seen him in his new black suit, his hair neatly trimmed and his eyes fixed on her with such love that her heart seemed to swell in her chest. Caleb stood beside him as best man, grinning broadly. The townspeople of Santa Fe had turned out in force, shopkeepers, ranchers, and families who had become friends over the years. Even Sheriff Donovan was present, having arranged for a deputy to handle his duties for the day. The ceremony itself was simple and heartfelt. Reverend Taylor spoke of love and partnership, of building a life together through good times and bad. When it came time for the vows, Heath took Abigail's hands in his voice strong and clear as he promised to love, honor, and cherish her all the days of his life. Abigail's voice trembled slightly as she repeated the words, overwhelmed by the journey that had brought them to this moment, from a burning building to a new beginning filled with promise. "By the authority vested in me," Reverend Taylor concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Heath's lips met hers in a kiss that sealed their commitment, sweet and tender yet filled with passion and promise. The guests erupted in cheers and applause, and as they turned to face their friends and neighbors as Mr. and Mrs. Lambert for the first time, Abigail felt a sense of completeness she had never known before. The celebration that followed was joyous and lively. Tables had been set up on the ranch lawn, laden with food prepared by Mrs. Holbrook and the women of the church. A small band played lively tunes, and as darkness fell, the lanterns created a magical atmosphere beneath the star-filled New Mexico sky. Heath and Abigail moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and good wishes. When they finally had a moment alone, Heath led her to a quiet corner of the garden, where the sound of the music was softer and they could speak privately. "Happy, Mrs. Lambert?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "It feels like a dream." "It's real," he assured her, touching his forehead to hers. "And it's just the beginning." As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Heath and Abigail stood on the porch of what was now their home, waving goodbye to the last of the revelers. When the final wagon disappeared down the lane, Heath swept Abigail into his arms. "Welcome home, wife," he murmured against her hair. "Home," she echoed, the word filled with meaning and promise. "I like the sound of that." The years that followed brought challenges and joys in equal measure. Abigail continued to run the bookshop in town, with the help of an assistant, while establishing a smaller library at the ranch for neighboring families. The telegraph office remained a successful addition to her business, connecting Santa Fe to the wider world. Heath's cattle operation prospered, allowing him to acquire additional land and expand into horse breeding. Together, they turned the Flying L into one of the most respected ranches in the territory, known for its quality stock and fair business practices. Their first child, a son they named William after Heath's father, arrived a year after their wedding, a sturdy, brown-eyed boy with his mother's curious nature and his father's determined spirit. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter, Elizabeth, with her mother's auburn hair and her father's quiet strength. On their 5th wedding anniversary, as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard, Abigail reflected on the journey that had brought them together. "It's strange to think that if my shop hadn't caught fire, we might never have met," she mused, leaning against Heath's shoulder. "I'd like to think we would have found each other somehow," he replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Some things are meant to be." "Like a cowboy strong enough to lift a ceiling beam," she teased gently. Heath chuckled, the sound resonating in his chest beneath her ear. "I still don't know how I did that. Dr. Fellows said it should have been impossible." "Not impossible," Abigail corrected, looking up into the face of the man she loved more with each passing day. "Just extraordinary, like our love." As the sun set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the land they had built together, Heath and Abigail Lambert held each other close, grateful for the fire that had threatened everything but ultimately given them their greatest gift, each other. In the years that followed, the story of the bookshop fire and Heath's heroic rescue became something of a legend in Santa Fe, a tale of extraordinary strength, inspired by love at first sight. Neither Heath nor Abigail ever corrected this romantic embellishment. After all, some stories are meant to inspire, to remind people that even in the darkest moments, light and love can emerge from the ashes. And when their grandchildren gathered around the fireplace on winter evenings, begging for the story of how Grandpa saved Grandma from the burning building, Heath and Abigail would exchange a smile, knowing that their legacy would live on not just in the prosperous ranch and the beloved bookshop, but in the hearts of those who learned from their example that true strength comes not from muscle alone, but from the courage to love completely and without reservation.